What's up? It is an episode of Metric, the user experience podcast. I'm Michael.
I'm Tim.
Oh, we're getting so good.
Oh my God.
So where did we leave off last week? We were talking about. Actually, I love this bullet point that you left in the Google Doc called the Persona Zoo. For those who aren't up and didn't catch up with like the last episode or they forgot, the idea is that somehow we got into this talk where I had ended up at Facebook for a thing, and we started talking about persona. We started talking about whales, and then got into this whole tangent about whales, barnacles, fish, and the like. And I think we're just going to pick up there. Okay, so...
Yeah, you didn't go much into the whole, like, exactly what the Facebook thing was you were doing and what, you know.
Yeah, we're practicing our to be continueds. The key now is just to remember what we left off with last time, so it feels almost seamless. Potentially, there's a future where somebody's going to actually go back and listen to every single one in chronological order, and maybe it can just seem like a constant, never-ending Joe Rogan podcast. Kind of forgot where exactly, how we got to the topic, but yeah. So over the course of the last few months, my job, the company I'm at, Whereby Us, we were part of this Facebook accelerator. So I got to go to Facebook HQ. Specifically, it's like it's called a Facebook Journalism Accelerator, and thing is that those who participated, who ended up being, there are a few kind of like media startups, like the one I'm at. I don't know if you're familiar with Patch. It was a part of AOL at some point, and then it became its own thing. And then there's a whole bunch of like nonprofit news startups.
Is AOL still a thing?
I don't think AOL. That's a good question. I don't know if AOL is. I know AOL Instant Messenger is gone as of like sometime earlier this year or last year. But yeah, so I said nonprofit startups. No, these are like kind of like well-established nonprofit, smaller news things, and I'm just totally doing them an injustice by trying to describe them. But yeah, here it is, like a bunch of like news people and a couple of media startups who are like news adjacent. And the idea is that Facebook is going to give us make us do a deep dive into like subscription and membership programs so that we would launch it. And then they would give us a grant to sustain it or to continue with this thing. So
did you get to meet Mark Zuckerberg?
But yeah, so I was at Classic Campus, and no, Mark wasn't there.
It's like a first name basis. Well, Mark wasn't there,
but maybe like spiritually he was. We had to go on this tour. It was kind of, let me back up. Facebook Classic Campus on a Tuesday morning is, like in early January, is a ghost town. However, we got a personal tour through that ghost town by a Facebook evangelist. If it's like downtown Disney, but a little religious in a way. And so what happened is like we have this guy who's talking to a bunch of news organizations or news adjacent folks, journalists who are incredibly critical of Facebook and especially given its current data blunders, including the one today that they just got outed on. But we had this guy talking about how kind of like Facebook as like a myth, as if we weren't there in like 2000, like in the mid 2000s to see Facebook become what it was, what it is that Facebook does. And what is it that Facebook does? Facebook connects the world. And it was, and it was so surreal that, yeah, it was pseudo religious, brainwashy. And I granted, this is just some person who is paid. This is their job, right? They're not going to like walk us around Facebook Classic Campus, talking shit. But it was bizarre.
the Facebook inspiration coach or the
Yes.
the Facebook inspirational leader. So,
It's a no photo, like it's a no photography zone.
oh
So we
wow,
couldn't. So there were only certain places where we could take like selfies or take pictures of anything. One of the buildings we were in was pretty much like it's a really dope like co-working space. It seems like it's really neat there. But the classic campus itself, the downtown part of it, where they have here's an arcade, here's like Mickey's Nachos or whatever they called it, like a nachos shop. Like here's a big building and a giant sign we bought from somewhere else because we thought it looked cool and we put it on top of the building. And it was ghostly because it was so empty.
I have to ask. The shirt that you're wearing, did you get from there? Because
So
for the
yeah,
listeners at home, you don't know, he's wearing a Facebook shirt right now.
Facebook, at least this part of Facebook that I saw, from my perspective as an outsider there, is designed so that you don't leave, right? If you work there, all of your needs are there. You have your gym, you have cafeteria with like free food, right? You have all of these things. What you also have is in the event that you need like deodorant or you need a t-shirt or a hoodie or it's a little chilly and you need a jacket or whatever, they have like a Facebook store. And it's not quite a gift shop, but I wandered in and I'm like, whoa. And they had these t-shirts that I'm wearing that are really like high quality tees. And yeah, it's got Facebook on it. But they were like $6. And so I was like, holy crap, I gotta buy some Facebook t-shirts. And yeah, and when after a while, like, so I unironically wore this the next day I was at Facebook. I just walked around with my Facebook shirt on at Facebook. And folks were like, where the fuck did you get this shirt? Like, and I was like, it's like, oh, I went into this like gift shop or whatever. And they're like, that's not a gift shop. You're not allowed in there.
Oh my gosh, you weren't even supposed to go in there? That's it's a little insidious and scary. I mean, it just like makes
So that's
you
all we came in here. So like we were making jokes this entire time, where are the cameras? And the joke being it's like, oh, the cameras are in your pockets, of course. It was neat to see, okay? And whatever, like Facebook's never gonna sponsor this podcast or whatever. Like nobody looked happy there. Everybody was in intense everybody who wasn't us were in like intense conversations, I'm sure, talking about their important products or something. But the folks that we did see there, who weren't many, were like constantly in a rush, no smiles on their face. It was just the strangest thing. And I'm a developer and a designer, and it was like seeing, I don't know, it was like going to Mecca. I was really interested in seeing it. I was in awe, certainly, of some of the things that I saw. Boy, it doesn't seem like it's any fun to be there, you know?
They're serious, like big. I mean, in regards to retargeting and click conversion and follow through, which is now like a lot of users have Messenger on their phone, but have uninstalled Facebook. But the audio that's captured from Messenger and what makes the ads that you see, like on Instagram and just basic Google search being derived from it. I mean, that's a serious kind of business, and I bet like click conversion, retargeting, and commerce is like on the forefront of everything they're talking about.
Oh, definitely. There were some really fascinating things. What
Are
is
you
Facebook?
still doing that, by the way, or is it that over, kind of, so to speak? Or?
Ah, that's a good question. Yeah. So officially it's over. It was I don't know, a 4 to 6 month long intensive, and we really grinded. We grounded out I think a pretty nice custom membership program. We basically produce like really like hyper local newsletters in the same way that you can get news about, I don't know, Miami or wherever. We do newsletters about how not just like the important news of the city that you're in, but like how best to participate in that community, how best to participate in your tribe.
How does so I mean, what you mentioned in the last podcast was like the whales, the fish, and the barnacle. How
Yeah.
does that plug into what you were doing with Facebook?
Yeah, so this whole rambling story about Facebook, the goal is to have news organizations start thinking about alternatives, basically to ad model like revenue. The big thing saying like, hey, look, you have a certain number of people who will pay you just to be you, just to exist for your mission, rather than try to write clickbait or do something like that and get and create content that is intended to get the most eyes because that's how it's monetized. Monetize instead, or at least differentiate by like having people like pay you, have some sort of like membership or subscription program, right? Kind of going back to the basics. There was one of the first talks there was by this guy. He was a guy who was essentially like introducing this concept of personas to folks who haven't thought about this ever. And specifically, he was introducing three different types, of which we know we can make as many types as we want, I suppose. But the ones he introduced were barnacles, fish, and whales. It was an interesting concept. The idea being that, like, look, the way to conceptualize this is that whales are your early adopters. They are the ones who basically they're the ones, your super users, who are willing to pay you for your product. There may only be a few of them. That's okay. The fish are your users, and the barnacles are, I don't know, clingers on, folks who use your content or whatever, but like are never going to be in the market to pay you for it for whatever reason, legit or. So the idea is that when you're forming like a membership program, who do you focus on? You focus on your whales. You create a product that the whales like. The whales then fund it by being the first to pay you for it. They're also the most likely to give you honest feedback and feedback that doesn't result in them canceling their subscriptions. And so then on the backs of the whales, you can feed the fish, or however that analogy goes. Does that make sense? Is that like a...
No, it does. And I don't think that, a lot of UX kind of positions, I think, unfortunately, unless you're in e-commerce or you're trying to sell something like a startup or bring an app to market, are probably not thinking about how money kind of ties into or relates to personas. So if you're talking about that early supporter, big spender versus who's the regular customer, who's on average kind of plugging in a decent amount of money over a long period of time, and then kind of like versus like, this is your drive-by kind of person, the person who's coming in, just maybe dropping some microtransaction or something, and then they're like moving on. And so, that makes sense. And I would expect Facebook to definitely consider that. It's interesting because I think that, as you know from like our conversations, personas are probably the most painful thing for most UX to talk about because it's like, it's useless, it's crap, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, hold the phone right there. Most UX, like I know that you and I are on the same page that like we think personas suck, or like more or less. But like from what I understand, like most of the folks might disagree with that. I think people like love like that the whole like the UX UI designers that are coming out of like new certificate programs and stuff. Like personas are their jam. Every time I say something like personas, they're like, who is this like curmudgeonly mad?
I actually, in my experience, I find that to be the exact opposite. I think that technical writers and content strategists and marketing people and potentially business analysts, I mean, they're the ones who care about personas. And I think the way that I perceive the way they use personas is what I'm thinking, like, this is useless and you're doing it all wrong. And I think that personas can be, very useful, but I think 90% of the time people do it completely wrong. And the reason why it's mostly wrong is people don't ever check their personas. They don't actually see if like, am I even close? Is this even right? Because they don't check it. They make it and they get a photo and they like, this is my super user, and they get a picture online and they're like, she likes surfing and maybe she's a weekend shoe shopper and she uses her iPhone. And it's like, where are you pulling any of that from? And have you actually checked to see if that's real? I've been thinking about personas for years now because, in higher education, it's kind of like, it's blasted at level one, meaning that if you're in library or higher education or anything, it's like, well, we don't have to ever care about our personas because there are students who are paying. And so we know, why would we care,
That's so bizarre. Our experiences are so different. When I was in higher ed UX, it was like, oh man. I mean, like, okay, all of our personas fell into two camps, faculty or students. But, it's like, this is Jim. He is our graduate student and pursuing a doctorate in psychology. And then you're right. There's always this thing. It's like, and he drives a Prius because he cares about the economy, or not the economy. I'm sorry. He cares about global warming because obviously he lives in Miami, very very scared of sea level rise
See,
and
to
stuff like
me,
that.
yeah, see, to me, that sounds like what is like a provisional persona, and I
Right.
think that's kind of Laura Klein has a book about this, which is fantastic. But it's to where like you're making it up because you don't know, and then but you don't in turn like kind of test it. And so in higher education, in libraries specifically, like 95% of our users were undergraduate students. And so it's like, why are we even making a graduate student persona? Because they literally make up 4% of our user base, if 1% is faculty. And I just feel like a lot of people use it as a tool to like give weight to what they want to see or what they think ideally is occurring, as opposed to check the reality and the numbers of their actual users.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. It's a tool for confirmation bias. Yeah, a deliberate Machiavellian tool to convince other people.
I think you just said it perfectly. I think it is, personas are a tool for confirmation bias. And I think you can't, so in higher ed or like a place to where your users are guaranteed already, like why care? You know what I mean? Where in like e-commerce or a startup, or where you're trying to, like you said with Facebook, kind of bring something to market that doesn't exist, you can't afford to make those mistakes because it's like, oh, we fail, or we lost sales and we don't have conversion. But I will say, having worked in e-commerce as well, like they're not as with it as they should be either. When you see places like Radio Shack and J.C. Penney's and Sears, like all kind of like nosediving. It's just like, yeah, you're not listening to the twofold side of what you're getting from them qualitatively, or actually looking at, actual data that you have, which could be from marketing, CRM kind of like marketing systems, and or like actual click data that's, from analytics.
Have you heard the jobs to be done argument against personas? The
Yeah, I actually love Jobs to Be Done, and I think a year or so ago
Yeah.
you shared with me like user stories are crap. You love job stories, and I'm like, you are 100% correct, and I've been pushing it ever since.
Yeah, so uh TLDR, the idea is that look, jobs to be done is this idea that I've always got to start with the analogy. Look, it's the one, if you Google it, you'll see it. But it's like if you end up in Home Depot because you're in the market for a drill, and you end up in the drill aisle. Clearly, I'm in Home Depot a lot, and there's and there are
Drill aisle, apparently. Drill
you're
aisle.
in the drill aisle, and there's market and there's all these posters everywhere marketing individual drills. The question, of course, is like, well, which drill is going to? What is the best marketing option for the drill? The idea is that, like, look, when you're buying a drill, you're not buying, unless you are in this edge case, but most people aren't buying the drill as a piece of a specification. They're not focusing on like how many RPMs it can go, or it's what's horsepower. I don't even know. I know nothing about drills. But what they're buying, the idea of jobs to be done, is that they're buying the mounted television on the wall. They're buying their finished living room. They're buying this kind of end product. The job to be done is mounting a TV on the wall. The solution is the drill. The argument against personas from this is that, look, when we're in a discovery period and we're designing a new product or a new service, if we, like you said, if we start with the personas, we're making a lot of assumptions that likely aren't backed up by data. But it's also creates this kind of a undercurrent where we're trying to design for a persona. And as you know, you can have you might your user base may be full of different personas. You can't practically scale for every persona or design for every persona. What you can do is design the best solution for the job that everybody has in common.
The other thing that I think that speaks directly to what you just said about the jobs to be done and then the personas and how they're kind of in some ways at conflict with one another is that people often do personas and then stop. They don't realize that personas change over time. That's what user maps are for, right? And so um, even if you did test a persona and that's your user, that's not necessarily going to be the persona a year from now. And that person's going to change, their circumstances are going to change, their motivation is going to change. Because once that Home Depot person who's in the drill aisle buys that TV and mounts it on the wall, their situation is like, I'm never doing that again. The service that I want or the job to be done is like, I want someone to install it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just want to get a new TV that fits in the already existing bracket that I have on the wall.
Even to piggyback off that, so that's sort of the beauty of the job to be done, right? Like designing products or services around that job, whatever you identify, also gives you, it makes it easier as like a company or organization to like orthogonally design very different products or services that still are part of that job. So like this drill company, they might not like, like they hire a new VP and they need to like increase their
Drill cells. They need to increase drill cells.
They need to increase drill cells. What is the next product that this company is going to design if they're in the drill business, right? I was like, well, they're going to design a bigger and better drill, maybe, or something like that. But if they're in the business of, if they're in the service provision business of solving this job to be done, this living room vision, well, then a company that makes drills, it makes sense then for them to also be in the business of providing the labor to install it for you, or designing the cord hiding suite of tools to hide the cords after you mount the drill, or to, I don't know, get in the living room design business, right? Because the idea is that if we're focused on, if the product is the product or we're designing for specific users, we might end up just building more drills, right? Like more, and at some point, we're going to be at peak drill. But using jobs to be done as a methodology makes it easier to conceptually change the vertical you're in and to offer something completely different that is still conceptually meets the requirements of your mission of the kind of goods that you put into the world.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because something that I'm kind of a project I'm working on with at work right now is we're kind of like seeing like, here's our core product, we know who our core user is, and we're selling. But now we're starting to kind of put out those feelers and try to find out what are the ancillary kind of things that we can get into, not just services, but also products. And then let's look into that. Is there a way that to bring a product to market or a software to market, and to do an MVP, we third partied this and we use this framework and so now it's like maybe we step back from using that third party because we could actually build an ancillary service that actually does that and it's more specific to our product. Or maybe there's something that, once we rolled our product out and we started talking to our users, we have no idea that they didn't have a way to order drill bits, or they didn't have a way to order, like adapters for something. I think that's, kind of when you think about starting from that first, I think guessing is fine. So I don't want to come off as being like, I hate user personas and user personas are crap, because I actually do think they're phenomenal. I think that they are, if you have data, use it. If you don't have data, get it. And it's okay to start with a guess, but you do need to test to see if your guesses are even right, because otherwise I think the scary thing, right, is that if you're not right, you are in this kind of scary area, which is you don't know if your products or services that you're providing are successfully hit with your users, and you don't even know if the users who you think are buying your products are the people that you're trying to sell to. So it seems like a huge disconnect by not testing it, at least for me.
I have an anecdote. We recently worked on adding a membership program to the city newsletters that we create, and to figure out what the MVP was. what kind of features is someone going to get out of paying a certain dollar per month to us. So to identify what that MVP even was going to be, we researched a bunch of our whales, who we identified the super users. We had the data, like the people who opened and read the most, the folks who responded the most and were engaged. So we just reached out to them and created like a little pocket of people that we ended up interviewing over video chat. To that end, so here we are. I don't see Whereby Us as a news organization, but the journalists on our team, on our local teams, do. Right? They're trained journalists. They have journalism degrees. They believe very much in the mission of journalism. In the same way, the librarians that we worked with believe very much in the mission of librarianship. So when we're trying to figure out like what is the right ask, like how are we going, like what's the right messaging for getting people to give us money? A total reasonable guess was support local journalism. Without you, we couldn't do this. We already had some data that shows that like people don't really care what it is we offer. They care about us as the people behind the product. And we knew that message would work, but support local journalism was something we tried. What we found out from our whales, just by testing them, was that it was a bit of an existential crisis. They don't see what we do as journalism. Like if we were to say like, hey, support local journalism, they might be like, you're right, and then donate to NPR. And then and so through this period of like research, what we kind of realized was that what is the job to be done? The newsletters, the daily newsletters that we provide, took a little bit of a turn where we assumed that, hey, it's to keep you informed. Like what are the best events and how do you live like a local? That's our mission.
So were your interviews with your whales, like, did you find what you expected, or did you find out more about who your whales were?
Well, what came up was that like our whales pretty much identified that like, look, it's like they don't use our not entirely like our newsletter. The job to be done isn't necessarily to inform. There's many other services that provide the local information. What are people like using us for? To facilitate like a sense of belonging in their community, like that we were a good vector for connecting people of like minds, so that you could find your tribe when you otherwise had difficulty finding those people. We found out that our job to be done was communal, or the service, the way we're solving that job by connecting these people through kind of like a news product. So it was an interesting like existential practice. Like I was no longer in the business of being on like doing UX and tech for a news product. I was in the business of connecting people to like minds, and that inspired a lot of different product ideas than those that otherwise are meant to inform.
That's actually pretty cool. I mean, that's poignant and powerful, because I think it sounds almost like serendipitous. Like you're just like, through kind of just talking to the whales, and you kind of figure out like, you can figure out like, either maybe you were wrong about what you thought, like your whale or your person, why they use your product. But it kind of refocuses, what do your potential users want? You know what I mean? And so it's kind of, value, kind of realignment. No, I think that's phenomenal. I think there is something that a lot of UXers have encountered there. And this may be the topic for the next show, because I think like to tell like kind of I know an experience that a UXer that I've know personally has kind of encountered is very similar to that. And so they work for a banking institution, PNC Bank, based out of Pittsburgh. And then, from the bank's perspective and the business perspective, they're trying to like, how do we sell? We want to add more value and give credit cards and easier loans and stuff for small business owners. So we're going to go on this kind of track to, kind of build all these products. And so fast forward a year, 2 years, they're like, no one's using our small business products for our small business owners. They're not using our accounts. They're not using our free checking. They're not using like all this kind of any of the services or cards they provide. So they actually started at PNC Bank a section inside of it that is very much like Adaptive Path and Capital One, but it's called the Innovation Center, and they go out and then kind of like they're the WTF kind of people where you're just like, we don't know why this problem is happening. We have no idea. Research it for us. And so basically, I think the small business people went to them and they were like, well, so they were like, well, have you talked to any of your users? Yeah, I mean, what do they like from what you provide? And they're like, no, we didn't at all. So they sent a team out and they surveyed their own customers who were small business people, and 50 to 100 of them, and just did good old fashioned user interviews, right? And then basically they found out that the persona that they created for the small business owner and the products that they were providing, the reason why they weren't getting purchased is because the majority of people that they interviewed who were PNC small business owners, they were like, I inherited this business from my dad. I don't want to run it. It's a hassle. You know what I mean? I would quit it in a heartbeat if I could. And other people were just like, it's like all day long, all I deal with is the small business and then contact for the business and purchasing and delivery. And it's a nightmare. You know what I mean? So the alignment and to where they're trying to where the bank actually thought that they were trying to help their small business people by giving them all these tools, they were completely misaligned when they started talking to their small business owners, because
wow.
They'd be like, we don't want to buy more things. We don't need upsold. We don't want more stuff. We want less. We want easier. We want cheaper. How can you make this effortless? You know what I mean? And so that misalignment between what the business thinks the product or service is, but when they actually start to find out what we were selling is not what our users wanted, and how we thought that they were using it, like you were saying, for talking to your whales, and then what the value that they got out of it and what they used it for, it was totally not even what people thought it was. It just makes me think of what other businesses or services that are out there that people are like, yeah, we sell, and then the users who are using it is like, yeah, I only do this so I can keep lists. I don't, or I only do this to use this as a way to organize stuff. I don't use it for X, Y, and Z, and just what's the disconnect of that when you're not talking to, finding out what the highest, it's most like that, value, how can we add value? What is the added value, and the value alignment from what it's perceived from the business side versus the user side is completely different.
And that's it. Yo, if you want to find this and other episodes, please find us on metricpodcast.com. More likely, find us in your podcatcher of choice, where you will see Tim Broader's name alongside mine. Give us a rating of 5 stars. We've been off the air for long enough that we could totally use your help in getting our numbers back up. One of the best things you can totally do is share this to your friends. You probably, if you're listening to this, other people in the biz, let them know why we are the best UX podcast in the ecosystem.